Something a bit different for you F1 fans today. We've put the power in your hands and, well, we've handed control over to you and we've brought Ed and Scott in to answer your questions. We've got lots to get through, so let's crack on straight away. First question is from Young Original 03, who was one of many to ask us about Lewis Hamilton's impending switch to Ferrari, saying, who wins a Constructors' Championship first? A post-Hamilton Mercedes or Ferrari with Lewis? Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, that is very tricky. And the fun part is that a few months ago, I think the answer would have been quite different. When Ferrari started the season so brightly, Mercedes had an awful start to 24. Everyone was thinking, well, what does Lewis know that we all don't? He's done it again, the same as when he preempted that great move to Mercedes over a decade ago now. Now, the last few months, you would say, actually, the Ferrari trajectory looks a bit worrying and the Mercedes one looks better. Plus, recent history, Mercedes knows how to win championships. Ferrari seems to have forgotten and instead has found all kinds of ways to not win championships. So that's what makes it such a fun narrative. And I think the other element to it is I don't think Hamilton alone can be the difference between Ferrari not winning and winning in terms of how they've failed to win the last few years. But if Ferrari can get the car, if it can get the team together, if it can develop well enough to be in title contention, then maybe Hamilton can prove that he is the difference where other drivers have failed in the past. Again, there are so many factors that make that so tantalising.
Are you going to answer it then?
I was doing my best not to.
Trying to dodge it.
I would say balance of probability, probably Mercedes.
There'll be an interesting sliding doors moment in the second half of the season as well, because Ferrari have had these bouncing problems, the porpoising with that Spanish Grand Prix update. Now, there will be a package after the break that will attempt to solve that fully. If they can do that, get back on track, then it's all bets are off again. But I'd certainly agree with Scott that right now, if I had to put money on it, I'd say Mercedes.
That's the beauty of all these questions. As soon as circumstances change slightly, we can just change our mind and deny we ever said what we said before. A question on a similar topic that we had from Alexa Vijatovic, who says, how do you see the relationship between Hamilton and Leclerc next year? Who will be the team leader? And can Leclerc challenge Lewis? Ed?
I would expect the relationship actually to be good. Now, there's always a battle for supremacy in any team. The team leadership is dictated by performance, isn't it? Charles Leclerc has a number of advantages. Long-term incumbency at Ferrari, so he knows the team inside out. We know how quick he is. He's a very strong race driver as well. Lewis Hamilton, though, is the shiny new thing coming in, isn't he? The exciting all-time great that's joining the team. So both will have a degree of momentum in different ways. I think they will get on fine. I don't think they're going to be super political. They will let what they do on track do the talking. And I'd argue it's still very much an open question. We know how fast Leclerc is in qualifying, but Hamilton has the most pole positions of anyone. He's no slouch. Then you come to races. We know how good Lewis Hamilton is on tyre management, but Charles Leclerc, actually, it's not talked about enough. He's really good when it comes to that as well. He's done some mega tyre management stints, and against Hamilton, we'll be able to see how that calibrates and compares. So I'd say it's a really fascinating open question. I actually don't know who will prevail in that. If I had to now, I'd say Leclerc's incumbency gives him a tiny advantage, but it's very, very slender. So I think this could be a battle for the ages.
Yeah, it's a bit similar to Hamilton versus George Russell at Mercedes, but Leclerc has one or two of those little advantages that Russell hasn't had. You know, Russell came into Hamilton's team, whereas Hamilton's going into Leclerc's team, and as Ed says, I think that will be quite crucial. Leclerc's also had more time sort of in that race-winning, front-running environment than Russell's had at Mercedes. And I think although both young drivers, Leclerc and Russell, have proven themselves capable of making mistakes, my suspicion is Leclerc at the moment is just a little bit ahead of Russell in terms of his own development. So there's elements there that make him fractionally more formidable than Russell, who himself is a very, very good driver and has given Hamilton a very hard time over their period as Mercedes teammates. So it is a bit of a knife edge, that Hamilton-Leclerc dynamic. But I do think the relationship side of things should be quite good, because I think they have some natural kind of common ground in a way that Hamilton and Russell don't, in that both of them are very interested in non-F1 pursuits, fashion and music and that kind of thing. I think they might have actually quite a good relationship. I wouldn't say they're friends, but I can see that being quite a good mentor and pupil relationship. Whereas at Hamilton-Russell, there was always that element of Russell was coming in and trying to take Hamilton's team away from him. So maybe that'll work a bit more naturally at Ferrari.
It's also worth noting Lewis Hamilton doesn't get on with these cars, and Charles Leclerc does like the driving style of these cars. That could be significant. I'm talking about the generic qualities of this current reg set cars.
And that could all change in 2026. Now, we had a lot of questions, amusingly, about Alpine and Renault. That team seems to always be in the news at the moment. We'll pick a couple here. The first one is from Sonic Hill, who says, if Renault were to sell their team, which prospective buyers would bring the most value to F1? And which one would be the fans' choice? I don't necessarily expect you to be able to speak on behalf of the fans, Scott, but that value to F1, that sounds like phrasing from an F1 or FIA document, if ever I saw it.
And I think the two elements are linked, because I would say that the fan perspective probably is that they want Andretti to buy
true.
Alpine and then get that spot on the grid that so many people think Andretti, General Motors and Cadillac should be entitled to. I have my doubts that will happen. There are various reasons for that, but I would just like to see someone with actual sporting ambition. And I would like to think that is also shared by the majority of fans as well. They want a team that's going to come in, and look, there are always private agendas, commercial agendas at play when someone wants to buy an F1 team, because that is not a particularly... There's a very, very select few people around the world that can do that, and I would say that the normal person doesn't have a lot in common with someone that's capable of buying a Formula One team, or a group of investors capable of it. And, as an example, people are constantly linking, we had this in the questions as well, Alpine with high-tech, the fact that Oliver Oakes, the high-tech boss, is now the team principal at Alpine. High-tech in the past was very closely linked to Ural Kali and Nikita Mazepin. So is Mazepin going to end up on the grid? You wouldn't want an owner that comes in, takes over Alpine if Renault does sell, just to further agendas like that, putting a mediocre driver in Formula One. We've already got a situation that flirts with that quite perilously with Aston Martin and the Strolls, and Lance Stroll is a demonstrably much better driver than Nikita Mazepin. So I would just like to see an owner that is willing to put sporting ambition first.
It's also worth noting that there's precious little F1 can do about judging the value they bring, and they certainly won't care about the fans, because if somebody buys this team, that just gets them in because they own a team. So there's no control over that. I have to say, there will be some bad potential owners out there, but it's hard to imagine somebody not offering more to Formula One perhaps than Renault has. Okay, they've invested a lot and having a manufacturer in is good, but they've been consistently disappointing. So the bar's not as high as it might have to be for adding value, however you quantify that.
Do you think that whoever buys that team will still try to run it on 80% of the resources of top teams, which was Renault's big declaration, wasn't it? They decided that they wanted to be the most efficient team on the grid, and therefore they were going to take it to Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari with 4/5 of their resource.
Because that always works.
Exactly. And imagine, what part of me wonders if that's carried over into the budget cap era, where now everyone's got an imposed spending limit and they're going, yeah, but we're still only going to do it on 80% of what everyone else is doing.
It's the greatest of red flags in Formula One team ownership, isn't it? Where they try and make a virtue of having less resources. Zero excuse for it under the current cost cap rules.
While also making that classic mistake of setting an X-year plan. We're going to win races by year X, we're going to win titles by year X, and we're going to do it by spending less than anyone's ever had to spend to win a title in the modern era. Yeah, good luck, Chief. That's definitely going to go well.
It's just sad. Like, Renault's got such a great F1 history spanning so many different eras, loads of success. And yeah, if this most recent era of Renault in F1 is about to end, what's it going to be remembered for? There's not been enough in this era to be properly memorable. As I said, though, we had lots of questions about this. We briefly mentioned Andretti there. For what it's worth, they'd get my vote as well. And I think this is the route they should take. But we had a question from Once Upon a Techie, who said, given that Andretti is keen to establish themselves as the 11th team on the F1 grid, but is not interested in buying Alpine, will they regret their decision if Alpine successfully sells the team to someone like High-Tech? Ed?
Well, certainly Andretti don't want to buy the Renault team, the Alpine team, whatever you want to call it, because it comes with too much baggage. And they're going full steam ahead with their own startup team. They haven't backed off since Formula One said no. They're pushing on all guns blazing. The thinking is that they will be let in. Obviously, there's the antitrust investigation going on, and they're expecting come 2026 to be on the grid. They don't think Formula One can keep them out. Now, if they get to 2026 and they're still on the outside looking in, they might have reason to think, maybe we should have taken that option. But I just don't think they're thinking about that right now. They do not want Alpine because it's just a negative to their efforts. So it's the easy way in to buy a team. I won't completely rule out maybe them being some way to incentivise them to buy it. But the problem is, if you're selling a team, there are so many potential buyers out there. I know Scott said there's not many who can buy a team. That's certainly true. But if you've got 5, 10, 15 entities floating around interested, and there are a lot of them, some of them won't be able to pull it off, some of them will, then the price gets pushed up and up and up. And actually, it's a seller's market for Formula One teams now. So Andretti might also look at it economically and think, actually, this team would cost so much, because they could buy it and then just transplant it completely to their own operation. But then that would be a very, very...
entry.
Exactly, effectively do that. Wouldn't be the most cost-effective way to do things. And there is a point there where you ask, well, do they have the cash for it? Because there's a lot to spend. They've already spent a huge amount, and spending $1 billion plus on an F1 team. And remember, if they wanted all of it, they'd have to buy out not only Alpine, who owns 76% of it, but also that American investment company as well. So it's complicated. I think Andretti are backing themselves to get on the grid, partly through the antitrust route and just through F1 realising they cannot justify keeping them out.
There is that element of sort of legal pressure and investigation going on in the US on that side. I'm not entirely sure F1 considers that a massive priority or concern at the moment, because there are bigger political issues going on in the US at the moment that have various departments' attention. But sooner or later, F1 and Andretti will float high enough up the priority list of someone relevant or a relevant body, and it will get looked at. The question is whether Andretti's hung on long enough to still sort of be in the mix by then. The one element that has to be factored in is that F1 still hasn't closed the door that they left ajar slightly for 28, which is when Andretti and General Motors are meant to have a works engine by GM and Cadillac. And F1 is still kind of dangling that carrot of, well, if you're going to be a full-on works team in 28, just enter in 28 when that's ready. But Andretti's attitude, as Ed's kind of explained in full, is that they're going full guns blazing to be ready sooner than that, and they don't want to then hang around, because they want to, if they're spending all this money, they want to cash in and get the value of being in F1 as soon as possible. So it's very, very much an open topic, and it might be a little bit of who blinks first. Will F1 back down under escalating political pressure, or will Andretti look at something like the Enstone possibility and go, actually, this might just... ridiculously, this might be the most cost-efficient route, because otherwise, what are we going to have to wait until 28, spend a load of money in the meantime, and then have to pay a $800 million anti-dilution fund or something nonsense that gets snuck into Concord? That's the kind of thing that they could be battling.
It's worth noting as well, there's no entry process for 2028. So if Andretti, and they have asked, what do we do to apply for 2028? There's no process. So that carrot on a stick is made up at the moment until a process exists. And we also should remember that although there may be other things distracting those doing these investigations, Liberty Media have got other concerns with antitrust, with Live Nation and that kind of thing. So as a company, it's also in the sights, not just because of Formula One. So it's probably something they should take seriously.
Yeah, I'd be massively sceptical about that 2028 stuff. I think, Scott, you mentioned there'll be a new Concord agreement by then. I'd fully expect whatever gets enshrined in that Concord agreement to make it even harder, perhaps even impossible for another team to come in. I think that's when F1 becomes the closed shop that everyone who's in there already wants it to be now. But let's move on to another subject that's about F1's future. We had loads of questions about the 2026 rules. So many, in fact, that if this video goes well and you all enjoy this, we could even do a separate follow-up where we answer more of the 2026 questions specifically. The area we're going to focus on, because that's where we had the most questions, I think is best summed up firstly by Elle on YouTube, who says, should the 2026 regulations be pushed back by a year or two in order for them to be refined, but also to allow for closer battles between the current cars, just as we're now seeing the gaps in performance close down? We also had similar from Grantalica and MTB Body. The theme, I think, Scott, was really, do we want these rules now, just as the current rule set that I think the last question said we've struggled through the Red Bull dominance. Everything's closing up, but we're only going to get to enjoy this for 18 months of close competition before it all gets torn up again in 26.
Yeah, if only F1 had decades of history of consistent rules leading to convergence for us to have based this on. Nobody could have imagined that if you just left the rules alone for a few
have
years,
a bit
everybody
of patience for once.
Yes, I mean, there's a consensus in F1 amongst teams, even the ones that don't want the 26 rules. They feel that the F1 technical regs do actually need to exist on a 5 or 6 year cycle, just on the grounds of it isn't a spec formula, and technology has always been a key part of it. And that kind of interest, that possibility of a refresh, is something that F1 has always thrived under as a championship as a whole, even if it hasn't worked necessarily year to year. And there is, there's some truth and some validity to that. But where we're at for 26, I think we're going to take a backward step. I think the package that's been put together, there are so many concerns about it, but once that reaches a point of being broadly settled, I actually think they will have come up with a fairly neat package to address the biggest self-inflicted problems with the engine regulation choices that they've made. So we could have some quite interesting, strategic, slightly different racing than we have right now. We're not going to have DRS drive-by passes per se, but we might have different versions of a similar thing. But I don't think it'll be a disaster once it's all sorted. The problem is it will be worse than it is now. And the issue I have with it is that I don't really think we're getting much for what we're sacrificing. We, being F1 as a whole, and the people watching it, because if Renault are selling, or not even necessarily selling, but dumping their engine program, we're actually losing an engine manufacturer. And yes, we're getting Red Bull powertrains, but that's self-inflicted because Honda nearly bailed. And then Honda have done a U-turn, so Red Bull powertrains kind of exists by default now. And we've got Audi coming in, which is great, but they might be the worst team on the grid because the team that they're buying is so rubbish at the moment. So I don't really feel like F1's going to gain a huge amount. And I have a bit of a feeling that by the time we get to the next set of rules, by 2030 or wherever, I think we might be unpicking a bit of damage that's been caused by the impending set.
But there's zero chance they'll delay the rules. There's too many complications, as Scott alluded to. The Audi team won't have an engine. Red Bull won't have an engine, so it's just impractical. And these rules are built around the 50-50 splits, hybrid to conventional power. So that's the absolute number one objective. I think it's a bit of a shame. I'd have liked this rule cycle to have had maybe another year or two on it, because that is good for convergence, but they have focused 100% on getting these power units through. So it's not going to change, barring something massive like the circumstances that led to the 2022 regs being delayed, because originally they were for 21, but obviously COVID then happened. So barring some kind of complete blindsiding, I can't see it happening.
So talking about McLaren's driver lineup then, Norris versus Piastri, let's take a question we had from Brick JDM, who says, do you think Oscar Piastri will replace Lando Norris as the main driver at McLaren? And in brackets, I sure hope not. We also had from Young Original, who we heard from earlier, let's say McLaren make the fastest car in 2025. Would you guys back Oscar to beat Lando for the Drivers' Championship?
This is still very, very much a live question. This is a fascinating battle, and I can't judge which way it's going to go. Now, if you look at this moment where they actually are, then Norris is, by every metric, the stronger McLaren driver. He's 9.3 ahead in dry qualifying with a just over a 0.1 second advantage. He's finished ahead 9 times. Piastri's finished ahead 5 times when they both finished. Norris has been ahead on 71% of the laps. He's ahead 199 points to 167. And even in our driver rankings that I do after every race weekend, Norris is 8-6 up. But Norris is a 6-year driver, Piastri's a 2nd-year driver. And that's why this is really interesting, because we're seeing Piastri get stronger. There's more upward curve for a driver in the middle of their 2nd season than the one in their 6th season. And that's what is absolutely fascinating. Norris is going through a slightly tricky time. He's now consistently at the front. A few little weaknesses there, starts and first corners, making the most of things, but everybody has to acclimatise. It takes a little bit of time. How he adapts to it over the second half of the season will be key. But I do think there is an interesting question. Piastri's mega quick. Really, really quick. Norris is also very quick, but very, very good in races, an intelligent driver. He's got a very rounded skill set, I would say. But Piastri is going in the same direction. He's improved a lot in terms of race pace management, and generally he has been strong this year. He's had a couple of dodgy weekends, probably China and Spain. You'd say the pace wasn't there, but to be expected for a second-year driver. I'm also very interested to see how their mentalities fit in. Piastri is ice cool. I mean, he's the next level even from Kimi Raikkonen as an Iceman. Whereas Norris has shown a few signs of a little crack here and there, which I think he needs to get under control. That is the battle. And the reason I'm not going to come down on either side is I can see Piastri going further on that upward curve. So does he cross over Norris's overall level? He could, but I'm not going to say he definitely will because I don't know. So this is probably the best teammate battle in Formula One, I would say. We talked about Hamilton and Leclerc earlier, but this McLaren one is even more exciting because it's been going on for a while and McLaren's been moving up with them as well. Fantastic to say. As of right now, you'd have to put your money on Norris. But if you're judging for 25, I think it's all bets are off.
Let's move on to another news story that never seems to go away, and that's the Red Bull driver lineup saga. Obviously, we had quite a few questions about this, a lot of questions about this, actually. I'm going to try and we're choosing perhaps the broadest question that allows us to summarise all of the specific questions everybody asked. So, Scott, we had from Ant5687, how do you think the whole Red Bull V-Carb driver problem will end up finishing? So, cover all bases for us.
Yeah, so for the long version of this, go back and have a look at the video that we did after Sergio Perez was basically kept on for the rest of the season with Red Bull, or at least until after the summer break. But in short, Perez will at most, I think, see out the 24 season. I don't think he'll be kept on beyond that. If Daniel Ricciardo keeps up his progression as it was before the summer break, I suspect he'll replace Perez at Red Bull Racing for 2025. That'll open up a seat for Liam Lawson to slot in alongside Yuki Tsunoda. And then I think likely Formula 2 champion Isaac Hadjar will get the full simulator reserve driver, test driver role for the Red Bull and RB teams next year. So it'll all slot in fairly neatly, assuming, of course, Perez doesn't come out after the summer break and suddenly be posting regular podium finishes. That would just complicate it all over again.
It does illustrate the fact that Red Bull need to get their act together with their driver programme. They should be in the perfect position. They've got 4 F1 seats, including a junior team, second team, B team, whatever you want to call it. That should give them the decisive advantage. Yet they've not been strategic enough, they've not been rigorous enough, and there are signs that they're starting to take it a little bit more seriously in terms of selection, which is positive, because they should not be in a permanent state of driver crisis. They should be quite the opposite, and that's what they need to make sure they take advantage of in the future.
Let's stay on the topic then of Red Bull. Well, drivers no longer part of the Red Bull driver programme, but who have found their way elsewhere in F1, because 2 of them are going to be teammates next year at Williams. And we had lots of questions about the pairing of Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon at Williams and Williams' prospects. They obviously seem to have taken a bit of a step backwards this year, but is it all part of a wider plan to move forward in the long term? So we'll take a question here from Zija Music 8843 Ed, who says, do you think Williams will actually improve with Carlos and Alex, or is it going to be just another false dawn?
Yeah, I don't think this is a false dawn because there is so much positive going on there. When Doralton Capital bought the team, they were giving it consistent investment. That's the first time pretty much in almost 2 decades that they've had that reliable, dependable, steady influx of cash. Now, that's been used very, very well. James Vowles' leadership has been excellent. They've improved facilities. Everything's being done very, very strategically. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. It is going to take years from here because Williams were quite a long way behind in terms of their facilities, etc. But I don't think this is a false dawn because you can tell it's not a false dawn if it keeps happening day after day after day. And I think it will keep happening for Williams. It's just a question of how long. It might not happen quickly enough for Carlos Sainz's timeline, to be honest. He's almost 30. But I think we now, for the first time, can say with conviction that Williams is definitely on the path to much, much better things. Now, obviously, the further you go up the order, the steeper things get. But I think we can expect Williams certainly to be stronger next year than this year. There's good, clear reasons for why they've struggled. And I think that's the main thing. Consistent, steady progress for them. Williams, the most convincing in terms of their long-term prospects that they've been for a very, very long time.
The main thing I would point out is that as good as this driver lineup is, and it will probably be the best driver lineup in the midfield, the drivers, Logan Sargent's not great, but the drivers aren't the limiting factor for Williams at the moment. So that driver lineup can kind of be as great or as rubbish as they want it to be next season, and it will still have a fairly lowish ceiling. So this is the kind of thing where it's going to be 2-3 years down the line that you can judge whether or not Sainz and Albon have bought into a brilliant project and Williams have pulled a masterstroke by getting 2 great drivers in early on to be part of that, or if Vowles has just talked a really good game, pitched very effectively, and then actually that talk hasn't been backed up. So 25 should be better, but it's 26 and 27, if Sainz and Albon presumably are still around by then, that I think they will personally be judging whether or not they've made the right decision, and therefore we can judge them as well.
Let's move on to another team that's currently down the back of the grid. Obviously, we had a lot of questions about Audi, as you'd expect. A new manufacturer coming in generates a lot of attention, even if its current team, Sauber, is a bit rubbish. I'm going to take a question that we had from Schmazzy86, and we can kind of rapid fire this. Schmazzy says, I feel like Audi is going to be more competitive than most people think, even though the team, currently Sauber, is struggling. So the question is, how long do you guys think it will take Audi to score their first point, score their first podium, and then score their first victory? Ed, you can go first.
Well, if they do better than expected, it's been a spectacular piece of managing expectations with the team's on-track performance, because, of course, it's the same team that's currently there. So this is all part of the Audi project. First point will come quickly. There's points for 10 cars. There's no reason why they shouldn't do that. So first few races, first podium, the absolute earliest to get one on merit, I mean on pace, not in a lucky race, would be late 2027, probably 28. First win, 20, maybe 28. I mean, that if they do everything really well, I feel it's 28 absolute earliest, and that's being the most generous you can possibly be. Probably later than that. It might be so far over the horizon that it can't even be detected.
I think it depends how much progress is made over the next 18 months, because at the moment, this team is Audi. Audi is buying 100% of this team and it hasn't scored a point yet. So if there isn't good improvement over the next 18 months, will it score points in 26? Because the engine's not the limiting factor for the team at the moment. And I think the Audi side of things at the moment is the engine side. You can see that they haven't had the influence that they really need to have on the team yet. So I think the engine could be quite competitive. And if it's not a very good engine in 26, I think it will get there, because Audi doesn't really fail in motorsport. But first point should be in 26, but I wouldn't put anything past Sauber at the moment. 27, I think 28 for the first podium at the earliest. And the first win, I'd be surprised if it comes in the first 3 seasons, and there's a risk that it won't come at all.
Yeah, lots going on there at the moment. Obviously, we've got Mattia Binotto coming in now, and Jonathan Wheatley coming in from Red Bull as well. So all change on the leadership front. I'm with you that it's going to be, I'm sure it'll be points in the first year. I think gearing a team up to become a legitimate podium contender from where they are now, unless something happens in the rules that completely changes the game and lets them into the front half of the field somehow, I'm thinking 5 years for a podium and a victory. I see no reason to believe that one's possible at the moment. Let's move on to our last couple of topics then. We had so many questions about the Mercedes vacant seat on the grid for 2025, which obviously meant a lot of questions about Kimi Antonelli, but plenty about Max Verstappen as well. So I'm going to combine some of those here, and you guys can kind of tackle the bits that you want to. Scott, I'll come to you first. To sum it all up, it's really El Padre asking, why are Mercedes so eager to get Verstappen? And is this a sign that they don't see George Russell as a future champion? Uvanovine asks, why is Mercedes taking so long to confirm Antonelli for 2025? And is Verstappen really in the mix for that seat? And Addis Posco says, if Antonelli and Russell do a really good job in 2025, is there a possibility that Verstappen ends up wanting to leave Red Bull for 2026 but has nowhere to go?
Well, the eagerness for Verstappen is why they haven't announced Antonelli yet, because Antonelli is there. He's under lock and key. If they want to put him in that car, they can. But they're just holding out hope that they might be able to get Verstappen as early as 25. And there's no point in closing the door all the while that is possible. All the while that Verstappen keeps making noises where he's unhappy with the sporting trajectory at Red Bull, the on-track stuff. The off-track stuff so far hasn't got to him. The controversy around Christian Horner, the arguments between Horner and Max's father, Jos. That kind of warring situation politically within Red Bull that goes beyond just Horner's situations. This kind of stuff hasn't bothered him, but the on-track stuff really is. Merck's not going to close that door all the while they think it's open. And that kind of open courting of Verstappen, the unspoken part of that is super interesting because it means that Mercedes are basically saying it's Verstappen and Antonelli and Russell in the picture. But sorry, Toto, you can't have 3 cars at the moment. And I don't think you're going to have 3 cars anytime soon. So someone's got to go. And if Antonelli's the future and you rate Verstappen so highly, you're willing to do this to try and get him through the door, the only logical conclusion is that therefore Mercedes is willing potentially to drop George Russell, which then makes the next couple of years super interesting because what if Russell, with the trajectory that Merck's on and Hamilton leaving the team, emerges as an outright championship contender next year or becomes world champion? So how that goes from here is, I think, is wide open at the moment, but Mercedes is slowly setting itself up to have to basically choose between Verstappen or one of their own, assuming Verstappen does become available.
The thing is, that's the definition of a good problem to have, isn't it? If you've got 3 drivers for 2 seats, then you've got a strong drive lineup, much better than having 1 driver for 2 seats, which sometimes teams suffer from. The bottom line is that Verstappen will never not be in demand. He's one of those drivers. The reason Mercedes are interested, the same reason anyone would have signed Michael Schumacher, anyone would have signed Lewis Hamilton, anyone would have signed Ayrton Senna, etc., because they are the preeminent driver of the current time. Toto Wolff said earlier this season that any team in the paddock would do handstands to get Verstappen, and I think that will continue to apply, and then the rest of it they can sort out later. If it's 3 drivers for 2 seats, then I'm sure George Russell or Kimi Antonelli would find gainful employment elsewhere without problem, and I'm sure Toto Wolff would be very influential in ensuring that happens.
Let's end it there for now, at least. I think we had over 350 questions for this, so we could have gone on for hours, but we've got to draw a line at some point. As I said earlier, if you'd like to do this on a weekly basis, come check us out on Patreon. We'll have links in the description for you to find us there. And if you have enjoyed this format, let us know and we'll look to do it again on YouTube as well.